Without stretching beyond our current comfort zone, there's going to be very little growth.
Making those mistakes and giving yourself the grace to make those mistakes is one way to be brave.
The key is to have failures that don't have a permanent effect. Failure can be a setback, but it's less of a setback if we do something positive about it.
Life comes at you quick. How do you prepare yourself for a career that you can't even imagine yet? That's what Cam and I will delve into each episode on future-proofing your career. Cam, a retired professor, memoirist, and CPA, shares insights from his dynamic professional life, while I, a recent graduate and a young professional, voice the concerns of the next professional generation as we try to navigate a rapidly changing market. Learn how to arm yourself with an open and informed mentality that will take your career to the next level.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode with me, Lexi and Cam. Today, we're going to be talking about failure. Lots of times we hear about failure and we automatically assume the worst. It's holding us back, it's causing problems, and we feel like the sum of our failures, which can be a really negative thing if you think about them as holding you back. But Cam and I want to reframe that for you and think about failure and you being a sum of your failures as a positive thing. Cam, why don't you talk about the importance of failure? Tell us why you think it's so valuable in our lives, and especially at this pivotal time for Gen Z moving into their careers.
Okay, thanks, Lexi. Hi, everyone. First one I can think of is that you need to stretch beyond your comfort zone. And without stretching beyond our current comfort zone, there's going to be very little growth. I sometimes use the hokey analogy of stretching your muscles. If you don't stretch to discomfort, you're never going to be more flexible. And the same idea is true of all our competencies and our abilities. If we don't stretch them to that brink where we start to feel some failure, or at least the fear of failure, we're not going to really know where our limits are. I like this little formula. It's that knowledge plus experience equals wisdom. So you can be like me, a university student most of your life and have all this knowledge. But without that experience to go with it, you can't reach to the wisdom level. So experience can be, of course, good experiences. We want those. But sometimes experiences are the harsh ones as well that involve failure, and we can learn a lot from those. So the key is to have failures that don't have a permanent effect. Because if there's real high stakes failure, then we can't be quite so cavalier with our approach toward failure. Oh, it's tuition, blah, blah, blah. The question I ask myself before any big risk is, what's the worst thing that could happen? That sounds pessimistic, but I like to go right for the bottom. What's the worst? And if I could accept the worst, all of a sudden that risk is probably worth taking and you flesh it out. But if you think of the very worst that could happen, then you check the probability of that happening. That's maybe a way of thinking about risk taking. Is it high stakes? And it's high stakes if something really bad could result.
I like what you said about the stretching analogy there, because we fear discomfort and we fear taking things to a new level, but we have to give ourselves a bit of grace and remember that it's our first time around and it's every person's first time around. And so making those mistakes and giving yourself the grace to make those mistakes is one way to be brave. You'll never be able to get into the splits if you don't do all of the little bits before that with stretching. So I really like that analogy. Cam, we've talked before about some examples of like flexing that muscle and doing things that make you feel really brave. And you've mentioned stand-up comedy and public speaking. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so let's talk failure. I grew up a funny guy, jokey, quippy, all that stuff. And I really admired comedians, stand-up comedians. So I grew up wanting to try it. So a few years ago, I thought, I'm going to try stand-up at an open mic night. And I didn't really do the right research. I was watching Prime and Netflix for these long 1 hour comedy specials. Well, they tell long stories in those. That's not what I should have been watching. I should have been watching 5 minute clips of comedians when they go boom, 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 boom. That's my time. So in my open mic, I got through 2 or 3 stories, got a few laughs maybe, and it was a complete fail. But the good news is I was friends with the MC, and he gave me some great feedback. I worked on a second set after that, and I was ready to go. I had this awesome second set, which was brand new. It was like the whole first set was totally thrown in the garbage. And then the pandemic came, and I still have not got around to doing that second set. But again, it's not about the failing, it's about learning from it. What was the tuition that I gained from it? And then I'm semi-fluent in French and semi-fluent in Spanish, the people I've been learning with over the years, and their fear of speaking, their fear of making a mistake stifled them to the point where they've never had a conversation with someone. They take these classes, hours and hours and years of classes, but they'll never become fluent because they're not going to try to converse and make the mistakes, because that's the only way to learn a language.
The comedy story that you said reminded me of something that someone pointed out to me about the way I think that I didn't notice other people weren't doing. And that's, I've always treated the first round of something, it's just a trial. I have no idea what I'm doing. Why would I be good at it? And I've never had a problem going for it. I have lots of examples of it. The main one being starting my business. I didn't know what I was doing. I don't have any schooling in it. I just gave it a shot, talked to somebody when I got stuck, implemented that feedback, moved on until I needed more feedback. It was just trial, error, trial, error. What I didn't realize that a lot of people were doing, and I've heard especially women doing this, is there's this fear of trying something that you won't be perfect at. People will get stuck. They won't do it until they've studied everything or learned everything or watched all the tutorials on it. And then if it goes poorly, they see that as, well, that's a setback. I can't do that again because I'm bad at it, and not, that was a trial run and now I know how to do better next time. It's just so interesting to realize that other people don't think like you. I would love to see people shift that and give things a go that they're bad at. I'm much worse at it in social contexts, for sure. And I'm always so jealous of people who are so brave in social contexts. I have so many friends that are willing to put themselves out there. They're willing to be these extroverted, crazy people in public that I would never be. And I admire that so much. So one of the most important things, Cam, and I want to highlight is that failure, people see it as a setback. That's the terminology that always goes with it. It's a setback. And our goal with this podcast episode today is to reframe it as, you're not failing backwards, you're failing forwards. To support that a little bit, I wanted to give one example that has been super prevalent in my life so far, but specifically my career so far. And that was not getting a job in first year that I worked so hard for. And it was a job at the writing center at my university. They only hired a few people. There had to be a minimum GPA, and I was so dedicated to it. I did everything I possibly could to just focus on that job. And then by the end of that first year, I interviewed for it. I went and bought all new clothes. And I remember one girl that I was friends with in first year also applied for that job. She didn't get it either. Understandably, we were annoyed. We were also young, so we thought it was everyone else's fault but our own. And I remember walking across the campus with her, complaining about how they clearly can't make a decision that's going to be beneficial. And I said to her, that's fine. If they don't want me, I'll do it myself. That summer, I started my editing business. And so part of it's editing, which is what led me to helping Cam with his memoir. But the other part of it is helping students through the writing process, learning about writing, how to be really great essay writers, how to use research tools, all that stuff, which is essentially what the Writing Center is at Laurier. It went super well. I didn't know anything about it. I made lots of connections, lots of trying things out, watching how they worked, trying better the next time. Then the next year, I applied to the Writing Center and wrote quite a sassy cover letter, actually. Pretty much saying, I don't know if you remember me, but you didn't take me last year. So instead of working for you, I created my whole new business and I'm ready to interview again. And I think you're going to be impressed. And they interviewed me and I got a job very quickly there. And from that, I kept working at the Writing Center, but I also kept working at my own business. And after my master's, all I wanted to do was keep working at the Writing Center. All I wanted to do. They said, we really want to keep you. We just don't have the headcount. But if there's openings at any point, like you're on our radar. I was very close with my bosses there, lots of communication. And I said, great, okay, I'll let you know how the job hunt goes. Because I didn't get a job there after university, I ended up getting into the cybersecurity stuff that I'm in now, which completely broadened my horizons, opened me up to, truthfully, a much more lucrative area to be in. It helped me learn so much. I've learned a lot more in this field than I would have staying in that small writing center. My ability to navigate failure, try new things, know what I like, work with Cam, all of these things are opportunities that I am almost certain would not exist had I simply gotten the job at the Writing Center in first year, because I would not have had to stretch, as Cam says, or flex those business muscles to learn all this new stuff. And so in comfort zones in the Writing Center, I would have stayed a much smaller version of myself. Failure is a step forward because you still tried something and you still progressed. And that's such a valuable mindset to take forward.
Failure can be a step forward because you took a setback and flexed and stretched and made it into a success, right? But a lot of us, you get those rejection letters from someone, or they don't even bother to respond to you at all. We get this feeling, well, I'm not good enough for them, therefore I'm not good enough. Whereas your attitude was more, I'm not good enough for them maybe, but I know I'm good enough, so I'm going to move forward in a different direction. Failure can be a setback, but it's less of a setback if we do something positive about it and try to make the best of it, rather than taking it as a failure and losing our confidence and self-esteem as a result.
Those risk-taking failures that we would sum up as embarrassing or disappointing, those are neutral until you apply your own perception, your own perspective to them. We can apply a negative, embarrassing, humiliating, disappointing lens to those failures, or we can take notes and progress. Another note too for our younger listeners, if you're around the same age as I am, so mid-20s, you're in that kind of age where adults, and especially your parents or your family, are starting to appear as people rather than your parents, which is a funny age to get to. You might start realizing that a lot of these people we look up to or we see as guides have a lot of these failures that are just built up behind them that you were never really privy to growing up. And that can be really eye-opening, but it can also remind you that there are so many different phases of your life and there's so much time to overwrite things that don't go right.
So you mentioned humiliation a bit earlier, Lexi, and I want to talk about what I call the two groups of people that are guilty for creating that feeling and that risk aversion and that fear of failure. And group number one is ourselves individually, us personally, not showing ourselves enough self-compassion, taking failure too hard. So like back to your being turned down by the Writing Center. If you take that too hard and internalize it and let it deflate you, that's not good. But you wind up living in a very small bubble with that approach. The second guilty party is everyone else around us, the communities around us, especially the ones like organizations that don't allow for failure. They bring new people into the workforce and give them scant levels of training and then come down hard on them when they're not getting these amazing results. And that's always unfortunate. And that's another reason why people are afraid of failure, is because of the humiliation and the fear of losing their job and walking around on eggshells at work. So group one, ourselves, we need to show more self-compassion to ourselves. We need to take failure in stride, like Lexi's example. And those are for the small stakes failures. Obviously, the big stakes failures, we need to be a bit more careful with those. So individually, we need to try to be easier on ourselves, I think, and be more willing to forgive ourselves for failure or accept failure, because you learn a lot more that way. And then for the group of others that won't allow for failure and might humiliate and that, we need to set cultures that just won't allow for that. There needs to be some acceptance of failure, at least once, maybe twice. You know, if someone keeps failing at something, then there's an issue and it needs to be dealt with. But failure in general does not need to be the dark negative thing that society portrays it to be.
When I was growing up, I was never really taught that failure was a bad thing. So if I got bad grades or didn't do well at something, it was never treated as means for punishment. Understandably, growing up, I have been not overly fearful of failure, and that makes sense. But Cam, I wanted to ask you, based on your memoir, based on how failure seems to have been treated in your childhood, how do you explain where you've gotten now and how you cope with failure so well?
Up to the age of 50, so like 7 years ago, I treated failure much like baby boomers and Gen X treat failure, the negative way we're talking about, where it shouldn't be really allowed. Failure is a bad thing, avoided at all costs. But then as I got a bit older and that wisdom started to come in a bit, I realized what we're talking about today is that we need to make room for failure. And I've really pushed that and incorporated it even into my teaching public speaking. And do you remember that, you know, what a participation award is, right? I'll never forget when I was 13 years old, the hockey season was over, and we all got these things called participation awards. And we looked at them and we looked at each other. And as I was leaving, I threw mine in the garbage, but I had to walk to a few different garbage bins because they were all full of these participation awards. And I still don't believe in participation awards, but I'll tell you what I do believe in is medals for courage. If you are willing to jump into something you've never done and you're nervous as hell and it's, you know, you're learning as you go, those are medals for courage. So when I teach public speaking, on the very first day, I've never seen so many professional, confident people become so fragile, so vulnerable as when they're about to stand up to public speak. When you're teaching it, I just found it was really important to provide for them what I called the consequence-free environment. So in other words, there's no stakes here. The stakes are not high today. I just want you to get through your 3-minute presentation. Don't care how good it is, how bad it is. But the one thing I did hold them to account for was preparation. If they looked unprepared, they would fail. But if they looked prepared and it was only nerves and that, then they automatically passed. Just by standing up for the first time in front of 30 people or however many people it is and presenting, they get a medal of courage. But here's where the accountability comes in. Because I would tell them at the end of the day, I say, okay, you got through your presentation, you got some good feedback from me and some from others. I said, next time you present in a month, I'm going to be watching for the improvements. And if I don't see the improvements, you will fail. So you had your permission to fail today. Now you've got a bit of experience under your belt and you've got the feedback. I want to see improvements. And people really embraced that approach. It really made them feel at ease and able to get through that first presentation. So we need to think about the allowance for failure and what is the proper allowance for failures.
I really resonate with what you said about the consequence-free zone, but also the permission to feel like you've done well as long as you were prepared. When I was in my master's, we did these huge presentations, like hour-long presentations, pretty regularly. In the first semester, I remember, I knew you weren't supposed to, but I remember writing these scripts. I would try and make myself feel better because it would be like a heading and then it'd be a bunch of bullet points. And I'd be like, well, see, I didn't write a script. It's a bunch of bullet points. But the bullet points were just fully a script. I would get so nervous reading them And I was a very prepared student. I would work really hard on these presentations. I would try and learn every angle of what I was talking about so that I had all this information and could speak candidly about it. And then I would force myself to read these scripts and I would get so, so nervous. I did not do incredibly well. I got good grades for the content, but the presentation aspect of them was always lacking. And then in the second semester, I switched over to I'm going to go up there. I know my stuff. I've studied it all. I understand it. I'm giving myself permission to be confident and just talk. And so I'd have my slides behind me, but you always do the slides with minimal wording is ideal and whatever. And I would just chat. And there was no script to help me along. I maybe had like quotes or page numbers. And my presentation abilities just shot through the roof because I gave myself permission to not be as perfect as a script would be. It's a skill, I think, that you have to really practice and you have to be okay with failing at. And the emphasis on being prepared, not being perfect, is huge. And I noticed it in public speaking, but I think we've also talked about it before in previous episodes where it's okay to try your best at something and maybe not feel like it's, the best, but to do your best. Be prepared, not perfect.
That's a great saying. Be prepared, not perfect. I love it. Way back in the 1990s, I was in the publishing industry and was already working for a company, but I had an opportunity at a better job with another company, but it was a 6-month contract. And that was okay with me because I was just about to be off to do my MBA after 6 months. So the timing was good. So I'm at this interview and the gentleman interviewing me, who would be my boss, he presented me with an inventory management issue. And he said, could you fix this? You'd need to do a project to fix this. And I said, absolutely yes, because I just did that with the company I'm with. And it took me about 3 months. So 3 or less months now with the learning curve, I can get that done. Absolutely. So that and the interview, generally speaking, went well. And I got hired. And when I started there, I started on that project. I went to IT and I said, here's what I'm going to need from you, but. And they said, yep, you fill out this form and the average waiting time is about 6 months. And right away, my promise of getting it done within the 6-month contract blown out of the water. Week 1. And that was tough. I got to say, this is when failure's tough because that was week 1 of roughly 26 weeks of failure hanging over my head. And this was the type of environment that did not allow for failure. So it was always brought up. It was brought up again at my closure interview. And yeah, it was just a really bad experience. And the worst thing to me, and this is something that happens in older generations, I think, not to get too generational, but let's face it, when that interviewer boss guy, when he asked me that question and I said 3 months, he knew there was a huge, long waiting list for IT. So he was setting me up for failure in some senses, and I'm not a victim because I'm the one that said 3 months. And what I learned from that is don't commit to something when you need external resources to get it done, and you're dependent on those external resources.
You bring up a good point too about questions. And I think this is one of the things that I've taken away from a lot of my failures. When you're entering new phases of your life, you don't know what you don't know. And so you have all of these areas where you should be asking more questions, but you don't know to ask them. One thing I found a lot while creating my business is that my first couple clients that came through, I had no idea what to ask them. I'd get requests to do something, I'd start it, and then it'd be so much follow up with the client, asking more questions, bugging them, it felt like, and all this stuff, until finally I got to a point where I knew exactly what questions to be asking up front in my original submission form. And now, if I didn't care about my customer service aspect, I don't have to talk to a client at all. I have literally everything I need to do my job and send it back and never talk to them. I do, but I didn't have to. I like that point you bring up, that you didn't even realize maybe what you needed to ask. And then moving forward, maybe you aren't necessarily directly better at doing that project, but you are better at being prepared to do that project.
You hit on something I had never thought of, is I didn't know what I didn't know at that time, mid-20s. I was about your age, actually. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know. But I want to mention that if you think about great leaders, great bosses, great managers, they will anticipate what the 25-year-old doesn't know, right? And they'll help them, they'll guide them. They'll either fill in the blanks or they might coach them into the blanks, meaning ask the questions to get them to the solution. But that's what great leaders do. And bosses that are really poor at their jobs, they're the ones that take advantage of people that don't know what they don't know.
Absolutely. In the role that I'm in now, I felt incredibly unprepared to do anything. I was willing to learn, and I was upfront about that I had lots to learn, but I was willing to do the work to learn. And my manager's job shifted in a lot of ways from being an expert in the field to dumbing down in a lot of ways what she was talking about until I caught up and was able to do those things with her. And so it was like a learning process for her, but her willingness to do that was one of the only reasons I've excelled in this position. Because had I been left to my own devices, I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know how to get that information. And you also can't really access the internal workings of a company from research. Like, there's a lot to be said for managers who are willing to work with you and not against you or leave you to your own devices.
Agreed, 100%.
If you've been watching our podcast for a bit now, you'll notice that the end of every podcast wraps up with a lightning round question. And that's when Cam and I create questions or little activities for each other, and the other person is completely unprepared. So we don't know what's coming. We just have to answer on the fly. So I'll give it to Cam to start off this one. Cam, what is your lightning round?
I call this one, Lexi, would you risk it? Would you make a 5-minute presentation on a topic of your expertise in front of 1,000 people? Because the people who could promote you, if they're impressed enough, may take action.
Yes. I take pretty much any opportunity that comes at me at work. So if somebody presents me with something, I'm willing to do it. And it's funny that you say that, because just last week, my boss put out a request saying we needed a demo for something completed, because we're switching over to a new platform and no one in the company knows how to use it. And I volunteered. I said, yeah, I can put together that demo. No problem. It was actually 5 minutes and 18 seconds. So there you go. And in my brain, this demo is for my 15 coworkers. No one else is going to see that. That's fine. So I went in with blind confidence. Luckily, I put on a nice shirt. I did a little bit of makeup. I brushed my hair. But I did this demo and sent it off to my boss. And he said, great. Now, can you take that, download it, and send it off to the whole company? Sorry, what? And so I had gone in with blind confidence, and I never admitted it, that I hadn't realized that that's what it was for. And obviously it was professional enough that I felt comfortable doing that. But the confidence I went in doing that, because I thought it was for 15 and not 2,000 people, it was great. Went very smoothly and got lots of positive feedback on how well it went. So kind of a funny question, timely.
Timely.
My follow-up lightning round question for you is, if you had to pick one, which major failure in your life set you on the trajectory that you're on today? For example, mine was getting rejected from the Rating Center twice, completely set me on the career trajectory that I'm on right now.
Okay, well, Lexi, I need to take you back to the early 90s. I was even younger than you are now, and applying for my first job. And I was really excited. I think I was in the 3rd round of interviews. So it was like real short list stuff. And I was really excited. And then I didn't get the call. And it was a real dark, dismal feeling, because I'd put so much into this one company, because I had friends there and they all told me what a great job it was and you get to travel. I just put all my eggs in that basket foolishly. Now I know that. And I didn't get the job. I mean, that's the way life works, is more people want the job than they have room for, right? So, and then luck just came my way. I got a phone call. I was listed on a registry for the CPA, where people looking for jobs could. It was kind of like Job Shark, but a really primitive version in the early 90s. And I got a call from someone in publishing, the publishing industry. And I'd never thought of working in publishing, even though I love reading and writing. And so, long story short, I wound up starting my career in the publishing industry and loved every minute of it. I mean, I was in finance, so it's not always exciting, but I got to work with all the other divisions. I got to work with the editors and the artists and the production. It was a real life changer, and I'm so glad I didn't get that job that I'd put all my eggs in the basket for, because I wound up really loving publishing and made a real career out of that. And then transitioned into university teaching, which it all is kind of in the same family in many senses. I used to teach with the same books that I used to publish, you know? So it was that was my biggest failure that turned into something special.
I love that through all of university, I thought I would be going into publishing, and I quickly branched away from it after graduation, and you never thought you'd go into it and branched into it very quickly. So goes to show you that you can't really plan many of these things.
But it also shows, keep your options open and keep looking and make sure you try to get noticed in the right ways.
That's everything from us today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that by the end of this, you're feeling a little bit more confident about your failures, maybe a little bit more eager to fail at something. We encourage you to go do that. Pick something that you don't think you'll be good at, fail, and then maybe try again. Or like Cam in his comedy, don't, but know that you could. So thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, Lexi, and thank you to our awesome listeners. Until next time.
Bye, everyone.